Hello, BookTube. Since you're all being so nice to me about these Regency romances, I thought I would continue and we do a few more. Before we wrap up this romance bookcase, we're at the end of my library tour, except for the Penguin Wall, which is going to have to wait until the new year. But the end of the library tour is extended a little further than I thought, because I originally assumed I would ignore this. I've got a bookcase entirely composed of romance novels. And I assume that quite a few of you would not be interested, but it turns out quite a few of you are, and the rest of you are suffering in silence. So I thought we'd go through a few more of these things. Maybe 2 or 3 more videos. I'm enjoying myself so much I could do this for the rest of the year. So let's see. We'll just do another stack of these for those of you who are wondering what I'm talking about. I'm talking about old-style Regency romance novels, set in the Regency period in London, usually, or the English countryside, and starring a colorful cast of upper-crust characters from the ton, the very best of society, the cream of the landed gentry crop and wealthy merchants, and specifically 2 members of that group, a headstrong young woman or a mouseish young woman, and a headstrong young man or a mouseish young man, who play a gavotte throughout the course of the novel and eventually come to love each other. They're very low stakes, very guaranteed things, incredibly predictable, although no less well fashioned for that. There are good Regency romance authors and there are poor Regency romance authors. It's true with anything. It doesn't matter how coarseted the genre is. It matters how well you do it. And for a long time these things came out several every month, and in the years since since I ignored them, I have come to love them above all other romance novels. I've actually made a small collection of these older kinds, because these old-style Regency romances are not made anymore. People do still make Regency romances set in the Regency period, but they are much bigger, they're much more opulent, and they are much more suggestive. much more suggestive. These things, there are stolen kisses and maybe sometimes brutal implications of more than that, but very seldom does that line get crossed. Maybe sometimes by a womanizing rake, maybe sometimes the narrative will show us him in her bedroom, but the whole point of showing us that is to show us that he has reached the rock bottom of sin and depravity, and it's a world from which he should be saved, not something like that is cool. And so we're going to start. We'll do just a stack of these things and see what we can see. So here we have Carla Kelly's Marion's Christmas Wish. You have holly on the mantelpiece. You have Christmas carols set up and ready to be sung in the parlor. Thing that Regencies go hand in hand with Christmas. They really do. Like this is Father Christmas. This is a Regency book. Here we've got, is this a Regency collection? Yeah, this is 2 Regencies set in the Winter Wonderland and Christmas period. I don't quite know why that is. I've yet to really figure that out, except that the Regency period appeals to romancers of history because it seems like a time when it was no stakes ribaldry, no parents were in the room, no accountability. The king was not ruling, and his ne'er-do-well wasteful son was kind of sort of ruling, mainly through parties. And that is not the historical reality at all, but nevertheless it's easy to romanticize it that way. And I think that might account for why Christmas shows up in so many Regency books, because Christmas is also easy to romanticize. It's easy for people to think that they remember perfect Christmases long ago. They don't. They don't, but nevertheless, Christmas in the actual Regency period would have been more or less unrecognizable to the people who bought these novels. The Christmas as we recognize it was largely an invention of Prince Albert about a century and a half after these novels are set, but it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter to the writers of them. So what have we got here? Miss Varian Winswich has not been raised to be a proper young lady. Instead, she has been educated to be as good as any man in everything from reading Greek to playing chess. Thus it was with dismay that she saw what falling in love could do to the most sensible of females, as she watched her sister Ariadne turn giddy when a gentleman captured her heart. Nevertheless, Marian vowed she would ever commit that feminine folly. Then the dashing Lord Gilbert Ingraham came to pay a Christmas visit, And the question was not only if this worldly lord would make Marion break her vow, it was also if this man, who could have any woman he wanted, would also break her heart. Why is her sister named Ariadne? That's a little bit much, even for the Regency period. Okay, then the next one is something I showed you as an example. This is something that I just read about a month ago. This is by Martha Kirkland. It's called The Ruby Necklace. And as you can see, I have reinforced it with clear plastic packing tape because I don't think it would have survived otherwise. Miss Emmeline Harrison was as innocent and ignorant of the ways of the world as only a vicar's daughter could be. Not universally true of vicar's daughters, but anyway. But now she found herself in a position that no vicar's daughter should ever have to face. She was the widow of a licentious blue blood after a marriage in name only. Around her neck was a precious heirloom that some London gentleman would kill for. So it was with difficulty for Emmeline to discern the true motives and intentions of the seductive suitors around her, most especially the dashing Captain Geoffrey Beauchamp and the dazzling Lord Liam Whitcomb. The only guidance Emmeline had was a book of advice, and though the counsel of this extraordinary guide was captivating and cunning as it was remarkably effective, following it was sure to lead a lovely young lady surrounded by such attractive temptation very dangerously, if delightfully, astray. And it's to Martha Kirkland's credit. Not every Regency romance author will do this. Most of them, in fact, don't. But it's to her credit that you don't actually know who the suitor. Sometimes the pattern is that you've got the woman who is going to be the star of the show, and you've got a number of men, and the pattern will be, which one is she going to pick? And usually authors do I think, intentionally bad job of hiding which one it's going to be. But this book, you're guessing. For a while, you're not really sure who it's going to be. And that's always fun. For me. Not necessarily for any of you. Then we have a Signet Regency romance called The Purloined Papers. Here we have a well-dressed couple. He looks a little military, and there is a country house in the background. I don't know if you can tell... but after a while of looking at these things, you start to notice the same models. Those are two different women, but that is the same man. You can tell because no amount of photoshopping or coloring or pasteling or whatnot has been able to hide the deformations to his face as a result of being a tobacco addict, which wouldn't be there in the Regency period, not anywhere near as pronounced. So once again, we have an example of a clearly 20th century pair of actors. Let's see what we have here. Chloe Fields has been employed as a companion, housekeeper, and lady's maid since her father's poor investments and her brother's reckless gambling drained the family coffers. Estranged from her family, she hopes to earn enough money to live independently in a cottage of her own. Then the news of her father's sudden death takes her back home and into the presence of a man she's loved for years. Captain Andrew Seberg, there you go, he's a military man, has never forgiven her for making romantic advances toward Chloe, has never forgiven himself, for making advances towards Chloe before joining the army 11 years earlier. After being injured at Waterloo, Andrew is recuperating at Seabrook Manor when he is asked to help investigate the mysterious death of Sir Nigel Fields, and finds his passion once again ignited by the woman he believes he so wrongly dishonored. It's been pointed out by some cynical wags that if the British actually had as many dashing wounded survivors of Waterloo as turn up in these Regency romances, they would have fielded an army of well over 1 million people. But nevertheless, we have to figure he's the only one. And that one is interesting for the time periods involved. 11 years is a long time. That's a Jane Austen length of time. Okay, here we have Alison Lane. This is The Rake and the Wallflower. Very much the same thing. Very much the same thing in that these two are clearly 20th century people. He is, look at his face. Look at the lower half of his face. He is a tobacco addict. In a way, in a, $5 at the drugstore way, in a 50 times a day way that would not have been true of a highborn member of the English gentry in the Regency period. It just, their faces didn't look this way. We have a million portraits. But anyway, what do we have here? I promise not to harp on that forever. So this is called The Rake and the Wallflower. They're on a park bench. And once again, a tiny anachronism. That not only do they look like 20th century people, but that is a 20th century park bench. That doesn't look like a park bench even in a private park would have looked like in the Regency period. And also, is it my imagination, or are they not looking at each other? She's looking at him. He doesn't seem to be looking at her. Maybe he sees a beetle on the ground. So among the smart set, innocent Mary Seabrook is positively out of place. She'd rather go bird watching than go to a ball, and her embarrassing habit of speaking the truth gets her nothing but funny looks. That's a few firebrand women in a row that we've seen in this batch. I like that. If her peculiar behavior keeps up all season, she may never find a man to marry. But when her bird-watching eyes catch sight of Lord Grayson, she sees right through his bad reputation to the intelligence and good humor beneath. Understandably, she can also see that danger follows Grayson at every turn, and that his many mishaps are more than mere coincidence. Someone wants him dead. Okay. Well, I'm all fired up. So this next one is Martha Kirkland. This is The Artful Heir. They are out in the countryside, bundled up against the weather in front of a picturesque waterfall. There's your guarantee that you have not seen this new in your bookstore. As I mentioned yesterday, that guarantee was only effective because stores didn't keep back copies of these things. So if you were a romance reader and you knew when the new Harlequins and the new Signets and the new whatnots came out at your store, perhaps you had gotten to know the clerk who puts them out so that you could just talk about them and whatnot. I had many, many regulars who knew to the hour. They knew my work schedule. They knew when I would put these things out. And if you knew that, then you knew that the new ones that were coming out where you saw this were not the old ones, and that the old ones were not shifted back into the rest of backstock. They were just gone. So what have we got here? With her renowned father ill, Miss Sarah Sterling traveled to Donmore Hall by herself to clean and restore the priceless paintings left to the new heir, Matthew Donaldson. Why would she do that? Is her father is the heir not related to her? Or, well, let's find out. It was simply scandalous for a young lady to be unchaperoned and employed. Far worse, Matthew Donaldson was no gentleman. A rough and tumble past had left him too unrefined for the narrow-minded ton. Yet as Sarah sought out to prove her expertise at art, she would find herself taken by Matthew's decidedly uncommon charm. Alas, his uncommon wealth would soon attract several uninvited high-born guests, including one prospective bride. Sarah felt strangely forlorn and suspicious. Could it be that the Donmore paintings were suddenly disappearing? There's another little thread that's running around here. We're hitting intrigue. They don't always do that. This is, boy, I mean, as usual, just like the last few times, every one of these is making me want to stop the camera and read. But we won't do. We'll just a few more, and then we'll be finished for today. This is another Martha Kirkland. This is another couple that are out in the wilderness. They're by a rushing stream with a horse appears to be grazing on mud. Okay, but maybe the artist is a city folk. Miss Madeline Wycliffe has two sisters as different as night and day. There was Arabella, bold and brazen, who stole Madeline's chance for a London season, and wed a rake whose debts now threatened the family estate. And there was Priscilla, as untouched as she was exquisite, perfect marriage bait to hook their menacingly mysterious new neighbor, the fabulously wealthy heir to Ballinger Hall. He's not going to want her, though. He's going to want her sister. Somehow, Madeline had to pull her family back from disaster while keeping Priscilla from a married fate worse than death. She would have to turn her back on the handsome seafaring stranger who offered her a voyage to the wilder shores of love. Oh my. I don't think she'll be postponing that voyage for long. So, all right, two more. Those of you who are suffering in silence here, two more. This next was another Martha Kirkland. It looks like we're going to finish out with Martha Kirkland. This is An Uncommon Courtship. There they are in front of a piano. This was a common thing in the days before radio, in the days before the cinema. It was a common thing in country houses for well over 200 years to entertain guests with what we now call amateur musicals, where one member of the household, or maybe two, would be well practiced, trained on the piano or the harp or singing, and guests would also be tapped to do that. Sometimes to hilarious effect, almost always boring effect, but nevertheless, it was a common thing. That's what those two are doing. They're not professional performers. They're just entertaining a house full of guests. And again, you'll notice, is this a fairly late date? The year 2000. Yeah, so comparatively late for Regency romances. Notice this is as new as the day it was made. White paper, still a sheen on the cover. But you notice, in the late 80s, for instance, and most of the 90s, you won't see covers that look like that. He is her age, and he's as attractive as she is. He has a boyish face. And that is not, I wonder if I can just randomly pick one. Well, we've seen plenty. Yeah, here you go. Look at that. That's from a few years earlier. And look, she looks the same, age-wise. He is much older. He's a good 15, 20 years older. That was a change that happened with these things as they started to skew towards the more suggestive demographic, the buying populace, that had already claimed the rest of mainstream romance. Just look at, Sarah could help me out here. The cover, is it the cover of Harlequin Romance number 1000 when they hit number 1000? I remember reading it because I thought it was a big deal that the series hit 1000. I think it's number 1000. The story is about pandas. Believe it or not. The story is about exotic wildlife. But the cover doesn't even have a woman on it. It has a man who looks like a Mr. Universe bodybuilding champion. He's a freak. He looks freakish. He isn't well built. He's freakishly built. He looks like a tanned version of the Hulk. And I remember thinking when I saw that, wow, that's how they commemorated 1,000 issues of Harlequin Romance? By making a cover that was only suitable within the last 6 months? But anyway, that shows you what the demographic was. Because Harlequin Romances were always for the much more conservative readers, people who knew exactly what they liked and who wanted what they liked to stay presentable. And here all of a sudden you had, naked porn on the cover, almost naked porn. The guy had jeans on. I wish I could put pictures in these videos. I would show you a picture of Harlequin Romance. I think it was Harlequin Romance number 1000. Sarah is doing a series where she spelunks through the history of Harlequin Romance and reads some of these things. So she's probably at least familiar with it. She hasn't read it, but anyway, this is a sign of that as well. This is the demographic was saying, well, the women who buy these things are less and less apologetic about the fact that they want to see himbos on the cover. They always did want to see them, but they once hid that fact. Now they're not hiding it anymore, and good for them. Anyway, Miss Eloise Kendall had long known that Gregory Ward was a rascal in the first degree. Okay, we have one more to go here. So when he returned from London to visit Shrewsbury Park and raise money for his burgeoning political career, she assumed his warm demeanor belied a heart as cold as ice. Eloise had forgotten the times before when he'd embarrassed her. She hadn't forgotten those times. And when no longer the schoolgirl Gregory would remember from his youth, lovely Eloise would resist his superficial charms. But when her younger brother is kidnapped, Gregory goes into action with money for a ransom and a cold steel waiting for the brutes who would harm young Jeremy. And in the heat of the moment, the mistakes of the past melt away like winter frost. That often happens. That's another familiar gimmick for these novels, is that things will not be going well and then some tragedy will happen. A little boy will break his arm, or a treasured pet will go missing, or something like that, and suddenly the man and the woman will realize in adversity exactly what they're like and that they do love each other. And it's again, can be done right or wrong. Okay, we're going to wrap up. We'll wrap up with this last one. It's another Martha Kirkland. I'd be willing to bet this is also 2000. 1999, close enough, because this is To Catch a Scoundrel, and look at that cover. He's younger than she is, and just as pretty. We've got swans in the background, but they look black. Let's see. Eugenia Bailey was a prim, ladylike schoolteacher with a very unladylike talent for cards. When her young cousin lost his fortune to the dastardly Lord Cedric Durham, she devised a plan to win it back. All Eugenia needed was flirting lessons to charm her way into the game, so she called on the wealthy Nathaniel Seymour, an infamous lover of women, for help. Nathaniel had never heard of such a ridiculous proposal and would have turned the becoming young lady down flat, but he had his own score to settle with the lecherous Durham. In no time at all, his innocent young pupil was mastering the looks, words, and coy tricks that helped her blossom into a beautiful, beguiling woman. Her newly learned charms were hard to resist. The passion between them was impossible to deny, and as the day came closer for Eugenia to play against the cold-hearted Durham, Nathaniel began to wonder if the plan wasn't too dangerous for his own heart. Of course it is. Of course it is. That's the point. Whenever you have something like that, it's not that the person who's learning how to kiss or seduce or whatever actually says, okay, thanks, last lesson, and then goes on to do it. No, they fall in love with the teacher. All right, well, that was shameless, but it put a smile on my face. That was our next batch of Regency romances, and we'll do a few more of these. I promise I won't overindulge. We'll do a few more of these, and I want to finish up these romances by doing a few of these walkthroughs, just a few books at a time, where I won't discuss the books, I'll just discuss what they're doing. But I want to finish this up with a few videos of contemporary romances. They might still be Regencies, but they won't be these older kind. I've got about 100 of those. I want to do a couple of videos where I show you those and we talk about them. So, but that's for a while. If you'll indulge me, I want to do a few more Regency videos first, because they're so much fun for me. But I will be back. Thank you, BookTube.